Welcome back. In the last video, Unit 7.1, we talked about SAS as short-term memory. In this video, Unit 7.2, we'll talk about SAS as working memory. Keep in mind, short-term memory and working memory are the same thing, the SAS. It's just a different way of looking at it. Initially, researchers had a very simple conception of SAS as a short-term memory. Later on, they developed a better, and a complex version of it, which is called the working memory. So we'll talk about SAS as working memory in this video. So in the last video, we tried to talk about SAS as short-term memory. What is the difference between this and working memory? Again, it is a way to explain different phenomena, right, that result in conceptualizing SAS as short-term memory. But the simple conception of short-term memory as a single store that holds limited amount of information for limited amount of time is sufficient to explain simpler tasks like reading a list of words. But it becomes difficult to explain more complex tasks, right? For that reason, Badley and Hitch developed a complex conception of it, where they thought of a multi-component system as opposed to a single box that uses or holds information. It's a multi-component system with each component having its own limited capacity. And this way of conceptualizing SAS as a working memory. It's effective in both explaining simple tasks and complex tasks. Okay, now before we talk about this model, I just wanted to try and answer this question. Try not to use your pen or pencil, just try to do it in your mind. What is the answer for this? Okay, whatever the answer is, I'm pretty sure you came up with the right answer. Here is the question. How did you solve this problem mentally? Well, usually people say that, okay, I added these two and multiplied this with this, and I held that number here, and then you took these two and added these two, and you had this number. Then you use this particular marker to divide this by this, right? You kind of held information, did multiple things, right? This is hard to explain using a simple conception of short-term memory. Now, another example would be, just imagine you are actually working at drive-through place, and people, and what do you do there? You take order from one customer and you talk to other customer. You actually swipe the card of the second customer while you're first customer, while you're actually taking order from the first customer, second customer, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple things your mind does at any for a given task. So to explain it, Badley and Hitch, this is Badley and this is Hitch, they proposed the first model of working memory. Again, there were several other models presented at that time, but the most popular one was Badley and Hitch's model of working memory, and they proposed in 1974. And that's what we'll talk about. When they initially proposed the model, it had only three structures, three components: the central executive, phonological loop, and visual spatial sketchpad. But later on in 2000, they added the fourth component, the episodic buffer. And we'll talk about each of these components in this particular video. So just to give you a general idea of Badley and Hitch's working memory model, it's a multi-component system. It has one main system or component called the central executive. It's like the CEO, and it has subcomponents: chronological loop, visuospatial sketchpad, and episodic buffer. Now, these multiple components are interconnected, and they are specialized in processing specific kind of information according to this model. For instance, phonological loop is for processing auditory and verbal information. Visual Spatial Sketchpad, or VSSP, is for processing visual and spatial information. An episodic buffer is for processing, in fact, for integrating all these different kinds of information, so it gives you a sense of a complete episodic experience, a personal experience, so that there is a sync between visual and auditory and other sense information, so you get a complete experience. Um, Now, before we talk about the individual components in specific, I just wanted to give you an idea that there was already evidence, neurological evidence, supporting this multi-component model. One evidence came uh, from this particular patient um, um, who had a short-term memory span of two items. In other words, he can only hold two items at any given point of time. Yet, the individual had normal cognitive ability, in other words, normal ability to learn, memorize, and comprehend information. Yet, the short-term memory was only two items. Now, it's hard to explain with the simple conception of short-term memory, which can only hold two items at any given point of time, to explain how this individual can normally perform cognitive abilities. A better way to explain would be to have a multi-component system. And short-term memory then is only one aspect of one of the components to hold some information at any given point of time. In other words, short-term memory then is only one aspect of a bigger complex multi-component system. So in the next slides, we'll talk about each of these components in detail. Thank you very much. Okay, what are the components? As we said earlier, the main component, the boss, is the central executive, CE. The other components are chronological loop, VSSP, and episodic buffer. First, we'll talk about the central executive. Central executive is the primary system, is the main system. It is the system that actually makes you conscious. Remember with that, what is short-term memory or what is SAS? We said this is that place which is the seat of consciousness. Well, according to working memory model, then the main component of that SAS that makes you aware of things is the central executive, because it makes plans for future actions. It consciously makes decisions. It actually takes moment to moment decisions. If you've decided to pay attention to what I'm saying, or decided to get distracted, whoever is making the decision of what to do at any given point of time is the central executive. It also assesses, remember, it's all about attentional resources, right? Because SAS is attentional resource as well, right? So SAS, so what central executive does is it assesses attentional needs depending on what you're doing. It assesses attentional needs of individual components, and it allocates required attentional resources, and it reallocates required attentional resources. It keeps track of attentional needs of individual components and keep allocating and reallocating. But also keep in mind that even the boss, the CEO, can run out of fuel, because attention in general is limited. So another way to think about central executive is to think about it as CEO of a large company. Now, remember, CEO doesn't do actual work, right? He makes important decisions and he delegates work to the managers or the employees, right? He doesn't even look at the work of the individual employees, but allocates or delegates work to the managers, who in turn will take care of the work. So also CEO is this person who makes moment to moment decisions, important for central higher cognitive functions, and it integrates information taken from multiple components to make bigger decisions. So central executive is that important part, and that's why this is the main system, and these are called subsystems or auxiliary systems. Let's talk about the first subcomponent or the second component of the working memory. It's the phonological loop. As the name suggests, it is for auditory and verbal information. When we say auditory, it is the information that you receive. Someone says something and you're hearing my voice right now, right? So you're processing auditory information. But when you speak, you also produce sound. Your ears also, your mind also processes what you produce. That would be the verbal information. So phonological loop processes both auditory and verbal information. The system itself, the phonological loop, is further divided into two subcomponents, and one is called the phonological store. The other one is the articulatory process. Now, keep in mind, just the name itself gives you enough information, right? One is more like a store, a system to store, hold information. The other one is more like a process to control the information held in your phonological store. That's exactly what it is. A phonological store is like your inner ear. Now, just try to say something in your head. Say something, say some words, say Shri, for instance. Now, when you said that Shri in your head, that sound is held somewhere as if there is an inner ear, imaginary analogy, right? That is the phonological store. It's your inner ear. It passively stores the information, the sound, right? Now, when you created that sound in your head, like Shri, not out loud, but in your head, right? That is the articulatory process. Articulatory process is active process of holding information in the phonological store. It's like your inner voice. So if you remember from the last video where we talked about how can we hold information for longer than its duration, then one thing we said was that you can do maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is repeating the word in your head over and over again, right? Well, that repetition is because of articulatory control process. So phonological loop has two structures: phonological store, which passively stores information, auditory or verbal, and articulatory control process, which maintains actively the stored information. And in the next slide, we'll talk about some phenomena related to phonological loop, related to articulatory process and also phonological store. Okay, so we'll talk about phonological loop related phenomenon related to phonological store and articulatory process. The first phenomenon is related to phonological store, and the next two phenomena are related to the articulatory process. Okay, let's talk about the first effect, the word length effect. The word length effect is the finding that it's harder to remember longer words than shorter words. If participants are presented with a list of shorter words and longer words, their accuracy is higher with shorter words when compared to longer words. And this is because of phonological store, right? It makes sense. If it's because of the limited capacity of the phonological store. If the words are longer, then they occupy more space, correct? So if you get a question like word length effect is because of, you can say, limited capacity of the phonological store. Now, let's talk about the other two phenomena related to articulatory process. Now, the next phenomenon we're going to talk about is called the phonological similarity effect. It is a finding that it's harder to remember a list of similar sounding words when compared to dissimilar sounding words. So, if participants are given a list of similar sounding words like pen, hen, ten, ben, versus a dissimilar list of words like paper, table, book, researchers found that it's easier to remember dissimilar sounding words than similar sounding words, and this phenomenon is called the phonological similarity effect. The finding that it's harder to remember similar sounding words. Well, what could be the reason here? Well, one reason could be that if both the list of items have same number of syllables, right, then the phonological store is same, right? What is different is how you are retrieving the stored information, and there could be confusion in terms of repeating or retrieving or sounding the similar sounding words as when compared to the dissimilar sounding words. So it will be harder for the system to retrieve similar sounding words. So that's why the memory accuracy suffers. So if you get a question, phonological similarity effect, what is it? Well, it is the fact that it's hard to remember similar sounding words. And why is it difficult? Well, the reason is due to articulatory process. And the last phonological loop related phenomenon is the articulatory suppression. Articulatory suppression is when you suppress or prevent rehearsal of words. Let's do this actually. I'm going to pause here for a second so that we have like not a long discussion. So I'm going to pause here and record another audio on this particular slide where we'll talk about articulatory suppression. Now, so let's do this. What I want you to do is do this with me. I want you to tap your finger on a table, or your say your laptop or your computer with me. Okay. Well, here we go. Do you hear this sound? While you're doing this, okay, I'm gonna give you a list of words. Right? You're gonna listen to this list of words and try to remember. Okay. Let's do this. Pen, book, chocolate, flower, pouch. Now, can you recall what are those words? It was easier, right? I'm pretty sure it's easier. Now, let's try to do this one, okay? Where I want you to repeat this sound. I want you to tap, okay? Now, do this. Say with me the the. Keep repeating. Don't stop. Come on, keep saying. I can't say now. You have to say it. The louder. Okay, now I'm gonna give you sounds. Keep saying. Now I want you to remember these sounds. Keep saying. I can't hear you. The yes. Keep saying. Bicycle, mat, phone, chocolate. Okay, so can you recall now? It's a little bit harder, right? The reason is that because you were saying the, it prevented you from rehearsing the list of words I gave you. This process is called articulatory suppression, which is preventing rehearsal of words or sounds is articulatory suppression. So if you get a question, articulatory suppression is related to, well, it's articulatory process. Now let's talk about the um, third component or the second subsystem, the Visual Spatial Sketchpad. It's also called VSSP, Visual Spatial Sketchpad. Now, this particular subsystem is specific to processing both visual and spatial information. That's why it's called Visual Spatial Sketchpad. Visual is just a two-dimensional picture or image processing. Spatial is a three-dimensional where you're also taking into account the spatial aspects of the information. Now, one interesting thing about the Visual Spatial Sketchpad is that the processing is not static. The processing in Visual Spatial Sketchpad is in real time. In other words, you would process information in this VSSP as if you're processing in real time in the real world. Okay, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about the different VSSP related phenomena. But for now, I just want to give you an idea that what we mean by real time is that you process visual and spatial information with an intention to interact and react with the objects that you're watching. What does it mean? Well, it is related to the embodied cognition. Remember, we talked about theories of text comprehension or comprehension in general, and we talked about embodied cognition, and we said that comprehension is not merely extracting propositions, but also simulating what you read so that you kind of create this story in your head. Right? Well, it's more than that. What it is basically, have you seen movies like these, the horror movies? Well, I don't like horror movies, right? But my wife likes horror movies. Now, what happens when you watch horror movies? Well, you startle, right? You respond as if you're a part of that particular a movie. There's no need for you to actually startle because you are not in that situation where the story is unfolded. You are outside the TV. You're in your bedroom. You're watching the movie. There's no way for you to feel scared, but yet we do. The reason is when you watch a video, you become a part of it, and your visual system, especially the VSSP, process the visual information with an intention so you can react and interact. Okay, so this is embodied cognition, and there are three phenomena related to VSSP and that we'll talk about now. One is mental rotation, the other one is boundary effect, and the third one is representational momentum. First phenomenon we'll talk about is the mental rotation, which is related to angle of rotation. Now, Shepard and Metzler, what they did is they presented participants with pairs of objects like these, where the second object is either a match of the first object, in other words, the same first object, or it's a different object. So participants have to say if it's the same object, they have to say yes. If it's a different object, they have to say no. Now, for the objects that were same, for the pairs of objects that were same, the second object, the researchers manipulated the angle of rotation. So the second object is either rotated to a smaller degree of angle or a longer degree of larger degree of angle. So the IV was the degree of rotation of the second item. And they measured how long participants took to respond to these items. And what they found was a direct relationship between a direct relationship between angle of rotation and the time taken to respond. So there was a linear relationship. With the increase in the angle of rotation between the first and the second object, the response time increased, suggesting as if you're manually rotating the object in your head till you get to the second object's image. This suggests that VSSP processing both visual and spatial information in real time, as if you're processing it manually. The next phenomenon we're going to talk about specific to VSSP is the boundary effect. Boundary effect is remembering more of visual scene than what is given to you. Typically, when participants are presented with pictures like these, right, and later when they're asked to identify which picture they saw by presenting them with different versions of the same picture, they would always select an image that has more information than the information that was originally presented in the image. So the idea here is that when you are processing an image like this, right? This is the actual image. What VSSP does is it stores this actual image, but it also adds additional information related to these images by bringing it in from long-term memory and storing both the actual image and the additional information that you've added, and stores that in your long-term memory, so that when participants are asked which image did you see this before, then you select the ones that has more information because your long-term memory has stored not only the actual image but also the additional information that your VSSP has added to it by pulling it from the long-term memory, and this is called boundary effect. Okay, the last phenomenon we're going to talk about is the representational momentum. Representational momentum is misremembering the position of an object farther along its path. Now, just imagine. Let's say I throw a ball at you, right? And let's say you're here, and I throw a ball here, from here, right? Now you need to be able to predict the path of this ball for you to actually locate where it's going to fall, so you can actually go there and catch the ball, right? But you don't need to do that when you're watching a video of somebody throwing the ball, correct? But Visual Spatial Sketchpad actually does that. It imagines that you are in the scene that is depicted in the video, and prepares you to react and interact with the objects, so that you keep track of the object although you're not required to. So in experiments of this sort, what typically happens is, a moving object is presented. A participant will see a screen, and they'll see a moving object, and the object disappears at a particular point. And later on, the participants would be asked, where did the object disappear? And they have to identify the point where the object disappeared. Usually, participants would report the object disappeared further along than the actual position where the object disappeared. In fact, not only further along, but along the path of the object. In other words, they predicted the path of the object. That's why they did it. So they misremembered the position of the object further along its path. That only happens when your system is actually processing as if you are a part of the system. So what the VSSP does is it stores the observed path, then it adds the predicted path, assuming that you're gonna interact with it, and stores both this information. That's why people misremember the position of it further along, and not just further along, but further along the path of the object. And this is called representational momentum. And this is one reason why VSSP is embodied. It processes information in real time. The episodic buffer is the last subcomponent. It is the one that was later added in 2000. The idea of this episodic buffer is that it integrates information from other components of working memory, like Visual Spatial Sketchpad, the VSSP, the phonological loop, and also from other senses, and also from long-term memory. It kind of gives you this complete experience. Just imagine watching a video with no sync between audio and video. You'll see the lip movements first, then you hear the sound, right? Doesn't make sense. I'm just using two modalities here, but think of all possible modalities. There should be a system to sync these things so that you'll get a complete experience, right? That's what episodic buffer does. And it is connected to, if you remember from the bigger picture video, your long term memory of episodic memory, which stores your personal experiences. There is one particular phenomenon related to episodic buffer. It's called reverse phonological similarity effect. Remember, phonological similarity effect is because of phonological loops articulatory process, right? Where there is a difficulty in remembering similar sounding words when compared to dissimilar sounding words. Well, reverse phonological similarity effect is opposite of that. Here, words that are similar are easier to remember than words that are dissimilar in a specific kind of task called working memory span test. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. It is, just remember, opposite to the phonological similarity effect. If phonological similarity effect is because of articulatory process of phonological loop, the reverse phonological similarity effect is because of the episodic buffer. You're right. So in experiments specific to the episodic buffer's reverse phonological similarity effect, participants typically go through a task called working memory span test. In this particular thing, participants would listen to or read a series of sentences. And the last word of the sentence is what they are supposed to remember after a series of sentences that they have read. So, working memory span would be your recall accuracy. If you remember 7 sentences as last words, then your working memory span would be 7. If you remember 10, 10. If you only remember the last words of 2 sentences, then it is 2. Now, what typically researchers do in experiments of this sort is that they manipulate the last word. Either the last words of these sentences are similar or dissimilar. In other words, they either rhyme or they don't rhyme. And they measure the number of words that they remember. And typically what they found, the results are that if the words are similar, then the accuracy is higher. So it's a reverse phonological similarity effect, right? The similar words are remembered better when compared to dissimilar words. This is the reverse phonological similarity effect. One reason why, if you think about it, to give you a better context, would be to think about rap, right? Remember, the sentences end with some kind of rhyming, and it's easy to remember that words because they all rhyme. So episodic buffer is the reason why you see reverse phonological similarity effect. Well, this brings us to the end of this video and the end of this unit. I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned. Have fun learning.